Welcome to NFL Nexus. In a move that sent shockwaves through the entire league, the Miami Dolphins basically bet their whole future on a backup quarterback. We're talking about a gamble that meant trading away a star receiver and swallowing nearly $100 million in dead money, all for a guy with just 2 career starts. So the question is, what on earth were they thinking? Let's get into it. So this is the big question, right? The one that had everybody buzzing. I mean, on the surface, it looks completely reckless, maybe even a little crazy. Conventional wisdom tells you that you build around your young stars. You don't trade them away. It tells you to avoid dead money like the plague, not willingly take on a record-breaking amount. But to really get what the Dolphins were doing, we need to uncover a plan that was quietly put together years before, and a long, long way from South Florida. It all kicked off with this wild shakeup in March of 2026. This is when the Dolphins front office made a series of moves that didn't just change their roster. No, they completely redefined their entire philosophy and their financial future, all in just a couple of days. Okay, let's be crystal clear about this. This wasn't just some trade. We're talking about Jalen Waddle. The guy was a cornerstone of their offense, a top 10 pick, a legit, game-breaking talent with the kind of speed that gives defensive coordinators nightmares. He was supposed to be a building block for the next 10 years. So trading a player like that, it screams that you're not just retooling, you're tearing the whole thing down to the studs to build something brand new around someone else. And this signing, this was the move that explained everything else. This was the new centerpiece. They immediately made this massive, massive commitment to a player who, honestly, to the rest of the league, was a big question mark. We all knew Willis had talent, but his NFL resume was, well, it was short. And that's what made the size of Miami's investment a total shock. So get this, they handed Willis a 3-year, $67.5 million deal. That averages out to $22.5 million a year, but here's the kicker, $45 million of that is fully guaranteed. Let me say that again, $45 million guaranteed. That's not a prove-it deal. It's not a let's see what you've got contract. No, that is a declaration. That is the team saying, Malik Willis, you are our franchise quarterback. End of story. Right. So with the ink barely dry on the Willis deal, the next domino had to fall. The team officially moved on from their former first-round pick, Tua Tagovailoa, a player they had poured so much time and energy into. This move just drew a definitive line in the sand. The Tua era in Miami was officially over. But the price tag for closing that book, it was absolutely staggering. By cutting Tua, the Dolphins chose to take on a record-breaking $99 million dead cap hit. For anyone who doesn't know, dead cap is basically money that counts against your salary cap for a player who isn't even on your team anymore. It's a financial anchor. It cripples your ability to sign other guys. Most teams will do anything to avoid it. Miami, they sprinted right towards it. The whole thing was so stunning, so financially huge, that analysts like Rob Parker over at Fox Sports Radio were immediately questioning their sanity. And you know what? His question pretty much summed up what the entire league was thinking. How could any team possibly justify this kind of financial backflip for a quarterback with such a limited resume? So why? Why would a team do this? Why take that historic cap hit? Why trade your star receiver? Well, the answer isn't in Miami. It's hundreds of miles north in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Turns out this was all about a calculated reunion. Yeah, this whole aggressive chase for Malik Willis was anything but a coincidence. It was the final piece of a puzzle they had been building for months. See, the Dolphins front office had been completely remade, with the new bosses plucked directly from the Green Bay Packers organization. They weren't just hiring people, they were importing an entire philosophy. And the timeline, it's like a trail of breadcrumbs. It tells the whole story. January 18th, the Dolphins hired Jeff Hafley, Green Bay's defensive coordinator, to be their new head coach. A little while later, they hired John Eric Sullivan, the Packers VP of Player Personnel, as their new GM. Then, just a few weeks after that, boom, they spend a fortune to sign a player they knew inside and out, Malik Willis. In fact, the new GM, John Eric Sullivan, basically telegraphed the whole play. At the NFL Combine in February, weeks before anyone could even sign a contract, he's out there publicly gushing about Willis. He wasn't just praising a guy he used to work with, he was basically pointing a giant neon sign at his #1 target. And this is the key. As Mike Florio from NBC pointed out, this wasn't a blind bet. It was a decision based on a mountain of inside information. While other teams had to go off limited game tape, Miami's new leadership had 2 years of data from every practice rep, every film session, every single meeting. They knew his work ethic, his personality, everything. They weren't guessing. They were acting on a deep conviction. And that feeling, it was clearly a two-way street. When Willis talked after signing the deal, the very first thing he brought up was his relationship with the new leadership. He called them by their nicknames, Halfley and Sully, which just highlights that comfort and familiarity that no other team could have possibly offered him. For him, this wasn't really a new beginning. It was picking up right where he left off. So this deep, deep belief in Willis, a belief built over 2 years of watching him every single day in Green Bay, it meant the Dolphins had to slam the door shut on their past. And boy, was it a painful and incredibly expensive breakup. This whole move just created this clear dividing line for the franchise. It was a pivot away from the turbulent Tua era, an era that had high hopes, but let's face it, pretty inconsistent results, to a completely new vision for the future. And that future was built not on draft type, but on trust and a shared history between the GM, the head coach, and the quarterback. Let's just put that $99 million dead cap hit into perspective for a second. Like we said, this is money that's just gone. You can't use it. To willingly take on one of the biggest dead money hits in the history of the sport isn't just a financial decision. It is a massive statement. It makes other huge dead cap hits like the Eagles with Carson Wentz or the Rams with Jared Goff look tiny in comparison. This was the nuclear option to guarantee a clean slate. So signing Willis and eating the massive cost of cutting Tua, that was just part one of the plan. But the very next move, that's what showed the entire world just how deeply committed Miami was to building their entire universe around their new QB. They weren't just giving him the keys, they were redesigning the whole car just for him. Seriously, if the contract was a statement, the Jalen Waddle trade was a giant exclamation point. You just don't trade away a #1 receiver, a true blue-chip weapon, unless you are screaming to your new quarterback, "You are our guy. This is your team now. We trust you more than we trust this established superstar." So in the deal, Miami ships Waddle off to Denver, and in return, they got a handful of draft picks, including a late first-rounder. They essentially swapped a proven Pro Bowl-level star for a bunch of future lottery tickets. They chose potential over production, a move that puts a ton of pressure on that front office to absolutely nail those draft picks. And this move puts the spotlight squarely on general manager John Eric Sullivan. The whole strategy now hangs on his ability to take those draft picks and rebuild the entire receiving corps from the ground up. His background in Green Bay, where he was key in scouting and drafting receivers, is basically his resume for this huge task. The Dolphins didn't just hire a GM, they hired his specific blueprint for team building. And when you look at Sullivan's draft history with the Packers, you can see that blueprint pretty clearly. Green Bay has this pattern of finding receivers in all rounds of the draft, not always in the first round, but constantly adding talent on day 2 and day 3 with guys like Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, and Romeo Doubs. The bet in Miami is that Sullivan can do that all over again and find guys that are a perfect fit for Willis' style of play. But of course, this entire $166 million plan, it all hinges on one massive question. Is Malik Willis actually ready for this? I mean, despite all the confidence from the front office, his resume as an NFL starter is incredibly thin. And that brings us to the central risk of this whole thing. He doesn't just have to be good. He has to be good enough to justify blowing up an entire franchise for him. Now, looking at his numbers from Green Bay, you can see why Miami was so intrigued. In 11 appearances, he had 9 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. That 0 is the number that jumps off the page. It suggests a player who, even with limited playing time, understood the system, made smart plays, and protected the football. And remember, when Jordan Love got hurt, Willis stepped in and led the team to 2 wins as a spot starter. He showed he could handle the pressure. So when you add it all up, the $67 million contract, the historic $99 million dead cap hit, and trading a star like Waddle, it all adds up to one of the biggest, most concentrated gambles on one single player that we have seen in recent NFL history. So what this all signals is that the Dolphins have completely ripped up the traditional team-building playbook. They aren't just trying to get talented players. They're building a team based on a philosophy of belief and pre-existing relationships. They are betting everything on the idea that the synergy between their GM, their head coach, and their quarterback is the secret sauce, that it's more valuable than any single Pro Bowl player. And it's a philosophy that Malik Willis himself is completely on board with. He talked about how important that familiarity is going to be for his development. He's not learning a new system, new coaches, or a new culture. He's walking into a building he already understands, with leaders who already believe in him. For a young quarterback, you can't put a price on that kind of stability. So the Miami Dolphins have pushed all their chips to the center of the table. They have bet their future, their money, and their reputation on the belief that the connection they built back in Green Bay is the secret to winning. Now, the entire NFL just has to wait and see if they're holding a royal flush or a total bust. So what do you think of Miami's high-stakes gamble? A total masterstroke or a disaster that's just waiting to happen? Let us know what you think down in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to NFL Nexus for more deep dives into the stories shaping the league. Thanks for watching. And hey, if you're looking for a way to support the channel, check out our coloring books. They're perfect for kids, grandkids, and adults too. You can find them through the link in the description or by scanning the QR code right here on your screen.